Elias lived a life apart. He was the keeper of the North Point Lighthouse. Years of solitude had etched lines on his face like the map of a distant, lonely world. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a depth that spoke of untold stories. Elias preferred the company of the seagulls and the rhythmic crash of the waves. He was a quiet man, content in his isolation. The lighthouse was his domain. Its spiral staircase, worn smooth by time and tide, led to the lamp room. Here the great lens rotated, casting its beam across the treacherous waters. Elias tended to it with meticulous care. He understood its importance, a beacon of hope in the darkest nights. The rhythmic pulse of the light was a comforting rhythm in his solitary life. Elias knew the sea's moods. He could predict a squall by the way the wind whispered through the tower. He could sense the coming of a storm in the salty tang of the air. He respected the ocean's power. He understood its capricious nature. He was a part of the coastal landscape as much as the rocks and the sand. His life revolved around the turning of the light, the changing of the tides, and the whispers of the wind. He rarely ventured into the nearby town. He preferred the solitude of his rocky perch. The townsfolk, in turn, regarded him with a mix of awe and suspicion. They whispered stories about his strange ways. They spoke of his uncanny ability to predict the weather. They called him the Hermit of North Point. He was a mystery to them, a solitary figure against the vast backdrop of the sea. He was content to remain so. The storm raged. The wind howled like a banshee. Rain lashed against the lighthouse windows. The sea churned, a cauldron of whitecaps and swirling currents. The small coastal town huddled in fear. The fishermen's wives paced the shore, their faces etched with worry. The storm had been brewing for days. Elias had watched its approach, a dark bruise on the horizon. He knew it would be a bad one. He had lit the lamp early, its beam a lifeline in the growing darkness. The wind shrieked around the tower, trying to tear it from its moorings. But the lighthouse stood firm, a sentinel against the storm. The townsfolk were terrified. Their small fishing boats were tossed about like toys in the monstrous waves. The men were out at sea. No one dared to venture out in such a tempest. They feared the worst. The storm was relentless, showing no sign of abating. The crashing waves seemed to mock their helplessness. Anxiety gnawed at them. They gathered on the cliffs, their faces pale and drawn. They watched the turbulent sea, praying for their loved ones' safe return. The storm seemed to embody their deepest fears. The roar of the wind drowned out their prayers. The darkness seemed to swallow their hope. The storm raged on, indifferent to their plight. Driven by desperation, a small group of townsfolk braved the storm. They sought refuge in the lighthouse. They had never dared to approach Elias's solitary domain before, but fear had overcome their apprehension. They hammered on the heavy wooden door. The sound was almost swallowed by the wind. Elias opened the door, his face impassive. He ushered them inside, his eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. The townsfolk huddled together, shivering from the cold and fear. They looked around the circular room. Their eyes fell upon a strange sight. A glowing orb rested on a pedestal in the center of the room. It pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light. It seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting gently. It emanated a warmth that belied the chill of the storm. The townsfolk stared at it, mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it. Whispers filled the room, questions and speculations swirling in the air. The orb seemed to respond to their fear. Its light intensified, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It radiated a sense of calm, a strange reassurance in the midst of the storm. The townsfolk were awestruck. They felt a strange pull towards the orb, a sense of wonder mixed with trepidation. They watched it, captivated by its ethereal beauty. Elias, seeing their awe, finally spoke. His voice was low and resonant. "This," he said, gesturing towards the orb, "is the guardian spirit of the sea." He explained that it had been entrusted to him years ago. It was his duty to protect it. It was his responsibility to use its power wisely. The orb, he explained, held the power to calm the seas. It could guide ships through treacherous waters. It could protect sailors from harm, but its power came with a heavy responsibility. It could not be used lightly. It could not be used for selfish gain. It was a gift, a sacred trust. He spoke of the legends surrounding the orb. He told of ancient mariners who had been guided to safety by its light. He described how it had quelled storms and saved countless lives. He spoke with reverence, his voice filled with the weight of generations of keepers. His words resonated with the townsfolk. They understood the significance of the orb. He told them that the orb chose its keeper. It revealed itself only to those deemed worthy. He had been chosen for his solitude, his connection to the sea, and his unwavering dedication to the lighthouse. He was the guardian of the light, both literal and metaphorical. He was the protector of the sea and all who sailed upon it. He carried the weight of this responsibility with quiet dignity.